Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you like today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode here on Voice of Adoptees podcast. I am joined this evening with a young gentleman out in Oregon, Alex Smith, who was adopted, and he's going to be sharing his story with us this evening. Welcome, Alex. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
So let's start from the beginning. Tell us about yourself, what you're up to.
My name is Alexander Smith. I'm currently 34 years old. I'm a construction worker in Portland area, and I am enjoying this beautiful weather right now.
All right. Well, there's something positive, right? Is it raining?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. So, what age were you adopted at?
So it all started at June 1st on my birthday, 1992, on the White Nights in St. Petersburg, Russia. The orphanage was counted for 1,200 plus kids. And that's how it all started when I met my birth parents. My mother and dad were from Maine, and they were trying to have kids and they couldn't. And there's an adoption agency that was saying, oh, by the way, there's kids that want to be adopted in Russia that they opened up. Would you want to go? And they were making these long distance phone calls in Hawaii International, which is now labeled the Family Tree Adoption Agency. And so they called there periodically and they said 2 weeks. And then my mother was very annoyed, and it was near her birthday, which was May 31st and still is. But she got tired of saying 2 weeks. And so she gunned down the CEO per se, or president of this Hawaiian international program, and said, if I'm not in Russia on my birthday, there's going to be a tornado. And so they said, all right, here's your tickets, go. And I remember that day when my parents showed up in that room in the orphanage. It was downstairs and in kind of the playground area where I used to be in most of the time. And I remember seeing this lady with a bag, and I went over there, crawled in her lap and said, Mama, and started eating Hershey's chocolate, and never had experienced Hershey chocolate in Russia in the orphanage. And so I didn't know what to do. And I wiped chocolate on her chest and her shirt. And then my dad came back and said, every time I leave, something happens. She's like, oh, I think we're done. And that's how it all originated. And then my sister that was adopted as well was shortly after that. And then went to Maine is where they lived at. And then my sister and I would speak Russian for almost 2 years in Maine because there was no Russians there at all. And her and I grew a big bond, a big trust bond. And we really just started growing and learning about ourselves. And then pretty much my dad lost a job and got the same exact job in Maine and then moved to Oregon. So every move that we did was not small. It was Russia to Maine, Maine to Portland. And then Oregon was when everything started to turn, getting comfortable with ourselves and being Russians and adopted. And that was the big turning point for my life and my sister's, but it was because like we found out we were adopted when we moved to Maine at like 12 or 13. And I remember that it was a dinner time, which is called supper for them in East Coast. And
That's right, supper time.
Supper time. And bringing those slangs over to East Coast to West Coast, people are like, what's pop? You mean soda? And so those are the small little things. But I remember that dinner table. They were like, "Don't have any friends over or anything. We're gonna have a family sit down and have supper." I'm like, "Okay." And then, at 12, they're like, "Just so you guys know, you guys are adopted from Russia. Let us know if you have any questions." And my sister and I would always be saying, "Nope, we don't have any questions," and we go upstairs and we talk and behind my parents' back because we don't know. We grew up together, and then it was a great experience going to Russia.
So that's interesting. You remember being adopted at a young age, but
I
you
remember
didn't.
the
You
whole experience.
but you didn't. So by the time you were told from your parents again, did you already know, or were you too young that you didn't understand what it meant at the time?
I was too young, but
Okay.
um, like I said, when I hit to Oregon, um, there was a deep culture already embedded in Oregon that we did not know about, and they have these old believers in Woodburn, Oregon, and that's when I realized my type of Russian was not their type of Russian. So they're old believers, Orthodox, the ones that wear, the fancy shirts and the hats for the women when they're married, and um, that's when my sister and I were getting comfortable about being adopted until we meet these other Russians that said, "Hey, by the way, you're not Russian." So it was almost like a civil war where we're more Russian than them, and they were saying that we weren't. And so we were really confused. We kind of quarreled a little bit. We didn't fit in. So then we're now in a culture shock again, saying, "Well, we're adopted," and come to my mom and dad and saying, "There's these Russians that say we're not Russian." And they're like, "Well, you're Russian. Just tell them that." But yeah, we're not getting into that.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah. I mean, how did that? These people that were saying that you're not Russian, were they themselves originally from Russia?
No,
Oh,
no,
so
they
they were.
were they were migrated. Their ancestors were migrated from deep South Russia to all the way to South America to here,
Oh,
and
okay. Wow.
it,
So that's kind of odd. I mean, you'd think why are you getting alienated by a group of people that are supposed to welcome you into their culture? And
uh,
I'm sure
and then
that wasn't
trying to speak
pleasant.
Russian to them too, because they say we'll speak something in Russian, and we did, and they would not understand it because it was a different dialect. There's like 7 different dialects of Russian, and they're like the ones that the broke a different type of Russian, and they're like, let's just make our own language kind of barrier, and so like we had a quarrels and we didn't fit in, and now we were just alienated. So now we're trying to understand ourselves and what a Russian really is.
Yeah, and so many people have said the same thing who are adopted from Russia. There's been debates about this over the years of, how Russian really are you? And are you defined by where you're born, or are you defined by who raised you? Are you defined by blood, or are you defined by citizenship? And the debate will go on forever. But I think, at least me personally, I think my belief is you are who you are, and if you associate whether it's I'm more Russian or I'm more American, that's perfectly okay. And I think people need to accept that for what it is. People have no right telling you otherwise because they're not you. So that's
Correct.
just my belief.
But
But
not knowing, or not knowing, but them saying that we're not Russian, I was like, well, I was born there. And they're like, I wasn't, but I'm just following my heritage roots. And I was like, that's exactly it. I'm more Russian than you without even acknowledging a word. But, and then you would say, oh, Russian holidays, there's like 54 of them. And I'm like, what holiday is it today? They're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, well, honestly, you don't take pride in it.
yeah, yeah, that must be frustrating, especially, you know, when you're still young and trying to figure it out, to have that negative experience. I mean, I hope that negative experience didn't, make you or your sister like never want to go back to Russia or anything. Or did
No,
you did that just honestly strengthen the bond of being more proud where you're from?
it strengthened the bond for me and my sister, and also my parents, because they were both supported, saying, well, you were born there, we got you there, we have evidence, we have your Russian passport, blah blah blah. And so um, then they're like, well, let's take you to Russia so you can kind of flex a little bit. And so I was 13 years old in 2003. went to Russia with my family, and the biggest treasure was meeting the guy that made it all happen, which was Sasha, one of the male Sashas, which is a popular trend. And I was a Sasha as well, but meeting him for the first time was an absolute treasure and a worth trip because he, I don't remember him, but just having that connection with him in Russia and seeing my parents just, you know, meeting him again was a really good eye opener of like the connection of the Russians and Americans. And he voluntarily helped my parents adopt us, which made it huge. He didn't work for an agency. He's a art state art museum, in St. Petersburg, and he just said, "Hey, I'll help these people adopt these two kids," and he's spent all this time, and then meeting him for the first time and giving a big hug, and then in a Russian serious face, he said, "Okay, you ready to see your orphanage?" I'm like, "Yeah, if it's still available." And we drove and we took down the metro, which is fancy word for the subway, and it's beautiful subways, by the way, slash metros.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Cleanest place. Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. It really kind of puts New York City and Boston into shame. Like,
Yeah, and it's just beautiful. It's quiet. You just read the faces for their stories of what they're going through, and it's like a museum when you go down there. And uh, I got off the metro with my family, and no further than, I don't know, 25 steps, I started smelling around me, and I said, "We're near the orphanage." And that guy Sasha looked at me and he in shock, saying, "You're absolutely right. How did you know?" It's like the smell of the trees. And I was like, "Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah." And I was right. And I went inside the orphanage, and the rush of smell hit me, and I had to step back. And I was like, "Whoa!" It was like having a flashback as a 12-year-old.
was it, so were you smelling the food, do you think?
I was smelling the trees
The
and the air
trees.
around me.
Yeah.
It was
It's
a very
weird. Yeah,
smell.
yeah. And how old? You were 13 when you went back. And
Yeah, so 13
so,
and a half years not being there.
wow. Yeah, that's impressive. When I went back to Russia, so I was adopted much younger, like 2. So memories not so much, but I will say when I went back and saw my orphanage 8 years ago when I was back in Russia,
Mhm.
um, I walked in and the first thing I smelled was like a soup or like a cabbage kind of soup, but it felt very, it had a, like I felt kind of like that, kind of like a home feeling. Like I didn't feel it was weird. I felt comfortable there. I didn't know anyone there, but like, I got to meet members of staff that remembered me, and it was a moment where that, you don't forget those types of
Did
moments.
they
And
call you by your orphanage name when they met you?
oh, absolutely. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, same here. This old man just rushed up to me and he was saying my Russian name and in great spaz and zeal, and everyone rushing over like I was a celebrity. Like, this is him, and I was like, "Oh man!" I made a big impression, and I did, though, because the orphanage that I was in, they only held the 4-year-olds, and so I was going to get transferred 75 miles to a different orphanage, and so I remember walking in, and I had competition, and so I'm trying to, show charm, and then this lady was in there, and yeah, I just had a lot of charm trying to get out.
Wow. It's just crazy to think that you had to really bump yourself up to, you're already looking out for yourself at such a young age being in the orphanage.
Yeah.
So did you ever, when you were in Russia, did you see the tourist attractions? You saw the orphanage, obviously.
So I,
Did
for
did
the
you go,
orphan,
did you find anything else while you were over there?
so the orphanage, the same guy that was over the moon seeing me for the second time after I was adopted, went to this tiny little closet door, and I kid you not, stacks of papers from the ground to the ceiling of all paperwork. And he was saying to me in Russian, because Sasha was translating, he was there definitely, saying, "By the way, your paperwork's in here." I'm like, "Well, this is an open door. Literally, can I have it?" And I was telling Sasha, "Hey, can we have it?" And he translated that, and he said no. And I'm like, "What the heck?" I didn't argue. It was with my parents, and and I was also underage at the time, but it don't matter. But the fact that like I was asking if I could have it, since I have my parents here, and they still would not give any material up. And but seeing that closet slash cabinet of that was disappointing. Like, why would you show me that?
Yeah, that doesn't, yeah, that must have been very frustrating and just hurtful in some ways, honestly, that it feel like you're so close to something, but they're not letting you.
Why they still want it? They're just still holding strong to their value of their culture.
Right. Now, did the paperwork that you did get through your adoption, did you get names of biological relatives? Did you like what information were you able to obtain yourself or through your adoptive parents?
Pretty much just myself. The Russian passport was my Americanized name that my parents gave me. Alexander Robert Smith is my Americanized, but the only thing that I know about my dad is his name was Boris, because my middle name is Borisovich, and the only kicker about me for my parents and my orphanage was my mom wanted me in the system and not to be adopted, and that was the contract that she signed, I guess. And so Sasha had to track her down, find her, and just say, "Hey, I know that you signed a contract saying you don't want your kid to be adopted. Somebody wants them. Do you are you okay with this kid being adopted?" And she said yes. And then she had to sign another paperwork saying that my parents wanted to sign for her because they were hearing horror stories about adoptions where they adopt a kid and then the mothers want to find their kids, and then once they find it they have legal actions to take their kids away from them. So she had to sign the paperwork that she couldn't take me away from these people that want to adopt me as well.
Wow, that's interesting because I've never had someone that I talked to before adopted from Russia with that same experience of having the birth mother having to sign additional paperwork. Usually, the best documents we get is a piece of paper written by your birth mom, like on a like a scratch pad that says I can't afford to keep this child, and they sign their name, and that's literally all I had. And I mean, so Hmm. So now you got that information and you had limited access to that. How long was your trip in Russia for?
Almost 6 weeks total for the adoption. That's including also adopting my sister, but there was a lot of hiccups because they said, come back in 6 months to get her. And of course, money under the
Right,
table saying we're not going to have that happen. But that was just a legal that documentation they wanted. So they made sure that didn't happen, and they're not going to make 2 trips to Russia to adopt 2 kids.
right.
And
So when you went back with your adoptive parents back to Russia, how long was your stay there for?
I think 5 weeks. It was just a little over a month.
Wow.
Made the most out of it, which was awesome. We spent most of the time in St. Petersburg, and they were white nights when we went there. So around 3:30, 4 o'clock, it kind of get like a dusk out, but it wouldn't get dark. So it was a big change, 11-hour difference. And but my sister and I remember it was like 4 a.m. and I said to my sister, "Hey, do you want to go walk around the streets without mom and dad knowing?" Because it was a pretty good straight stretch where we could just walk straight out of the street and come back. And like at 4:30 in the morning, my sister and I we walked around because my parents are sleepers, so we're like we'll be okay. And we were just embracing the culture by ourselves, and the smell and the sound and old people with homemade brooms, cleaning the streets and taking pride in their country. And then we took a train to Moscow, and that was a whole 360 spin again. Like when we went to Maine to Oregon, it was people didn't weren't proud to be Russians in Moscow, and it was very expensive, greedy, and it's kind of like Vegas, 3 days, 2 nights, no more, no longer.
Yep.
But we
Yeah.
got to see the changing of the guards in Moscow. We got to see, Red Square. We got to walk inside of the cathedral in there, which the steps are very big and beautiful inside and stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. I went
you
I
know,
I went in there too. It's kind of funny how it starts. You walk in, you're like, "Oh, this is so authentic, this is beautiful." You go around and back, they have a little flat screen TV. You're like, "Wait, that's not right."
and then the underground mall was really cool in Moscow. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Did you get the free ice cream at the Goom?
Nope, I did not.
Ah,
It's odd, but we're like, it's fine. We just embraced it all, and but it felt home. My sister and I both said we felt home, even though with the time change. But it was really cool walking in, in public with them because my parents look American, and Russians can point out Americans and Russians, and there was
yeah.
only one incident where when we were there, my dad wanted to go to a train museum, and they took us to we took two different cars, and we went to two different museums. And that's when my mom and my sister went together, my dad and I went together, and completely lost in Russia without both of us as a family at this place and not having cell phones. And that was a fun experience to remain calm. And my dad was losing it, and I was like, Dad, it's okay, let's just go back to the hotel. We spent 2.5 hours, and my sister and mom were already in the hotel room because they had the hotel key, and they're showing the taxi driver to take us there, and they did. And that was one scary incident, but I felt pretty calm because that's what they would have done if they got lost, is go
Right,
back.
right. So, wow. So, what would you say your highlight of that experience was, and what was the lowest of that trip?
Seeing Peter Hoff, because that was the guy that was just fascinated with fountains, and so there was a bunch of gold fountains everywhere and stuff. And it was this time after that lost incident separation, we were like, I don't care if we have to pay extra, we're going to be as a family in one car. But uh, it was probably like an hour and a half to 2 hour drive to this Peterhof, which is by the water. And it was gorgeous, gorgeous and fun. But then when I came back, and then you see these Russian dash cams, I can't believe that we survived these treacherous roads going to somewhere like that. So that was like one of the times, like, oh, it was a fun drive, and then realized modern days, like, man, that was a long drive. Anything could have happened. We would have in a car crash or anything because there was no speed signs or any of that. So that was one of the
Yep.
highlights of beauty, and not a lot of tourists go because it's authentic, and it's also a long drive out of nowhere that you don't know where you're going because Russians don't really know a lot of English. They can tell that you're out of the country, and they're going to do the best they can. And you're trusting like Uber drivers, people like that, to take you somewhere. And
Yeah.
the trust thing is huge. Russians trust each other. They're going to support each other. And it was good that my sister and I were there because we look Russian, and they're like, all right, we're going to help these people. And they're not going to try to like use you or anything, but it's just that trust issue and blanket.
Right. Yeah, one thing I noticed in Russia going back is they are very hospitable people. As soon as
Yeah.
they find out you're there for like a really good reason and a purpose, they're going to go out of their way to make your trip more enjoyable. I mean, when I was going to Smolensk, that's where I'm from. It was a train ride, 4 hour from Moscow to Smolensk. I was with my adoptive mother, and there was a part where it was just the two of us sitting in the little coupe of the train, and there was just two other Russians in there, and they were just fascinated by us because they were listening to us speak English the whole time, right? So they were just staring at us like, what? And then we were going digging through our bag, and I pulled out my American passport, and then I pulled out my Russian passport, and they're just like looking at each other like, who is this person? And there's this one moment where I was over by the balcony of outside the little compartment, just watching the countryside go by. It's just so gorgeous. And
Mhm.
one of the guys from the coupe came up and joined me, and he just came right next to me, and he asked, what's your name? basic phrases that I knew. I'm like, I told him who I was, and oh, I got, Simya, family in Smolensk, and he's just like, oh, you're from Smolensk. I'm like, mm-hmm. And immediately within 5 minutes, he ordered like the entire breakfast cart. Like we were having tea, anything I wanted. It was amazing. Like they're just there to help you, and it's a nice feeling that your typical Russian will be very graceful to other Russians because that's just who they are as people. And I remind people these days, with all the other political crap going on, it's not the Russian people, it's the governments. They have disagreements, but your average Russian is a nice person, just like most people around the world genuinely want to be nice to each other. But anyway, back to you, back to your story. So, um,
The
that's
most,
def,
when we went to the Heritage,
yeah,
and Sasha had to go to work, and so he invited his good army friend to take us, and his name was Pasha. And him and my sister Nastia got along so well, and it was a good feeling. And my parents loved it. We felt comfortable with him, even though he was new, but he took very good pride of us and loved us. And I remember when we left St. Petersburg to Moscow, he was crying, and even though it was like 3 days, and we told him to quit smoking because it was bad, and so we got him a whole pack of gum. And it was just that small connection that they take pride in each other. And even though it wasn't very long, he, you know, took heart to like these people are good people. And we met his family, and we did a huge goodbye token, not knowing them. And it's very disrespectful not taking any donations or a gift. And we're like, no, we can't do that, because he offered his army statue of a arm sleeve, his hat, and I was like, well, we can't take that. You need that. And it was just a really powerful moment, and the crying and stuff. And so we had to embrace it, and I was like, all right, as long as you're okay with it. But we didn't want to. But it was just a nice feeling of like comfort and just good Russian people.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the hospitality, I tell you.
They were
So,
very pleasant.
yeah. So when you get back to the US after this trip, tr
Mhm.
now we're going to talk about integrating back and again, you're integrating again, which seems like the fourth time we're going around the circle. We're back in the US now. Um, your post thoughts about the trip. You had, a couple months to ponder and think about it. What are your memories? What are you thinking? What do you miss?
I just missed how everyone treated you equal, per se. How clean and pride that everyone takes. The American flag is the American pride for being an American, and then Russian is just cleanness, open arms. Um, and like, even though there was a huge time zone, it's just the weather too was really pleasant. Um, you just don't get the European welcoming that you do in America, because they're influenced with a whole bunch of news and stuff, and Russia wasn't into that. We, my sister and I, we showed all our friends. We bought some Russian music CDs and showed all our friends, and we showed them this one-hit wonder from Numa Numa from Ozone, which was huge in the United States too, the Numa Numa song.
Right. Yep. Yep.
And they're like, "Oh, you saw that? That's just out now." And so there was like probably a 2 month delay, and they're like, "Yeah, we know about that way before you guys did." And it's Romanian, but it's not Russian. But it was a big like boost of us, like what we know more before the Americans do. And showing our friends the culture of Russia, embrace them, saying these guys are really Russian compared to these old believers. And so we kind of like formed a bigger supporting platform of saying, hey, you need to stop saying that they're not Russian. They're more Russian than you. And so it still felt good, but we still felt, my sister and I felt isolated, saying, I don't know if this is the Russians that we need to be near around. So, but it still felt good having that support platform, and that, I don't know, evidence of that we're really Russian, and we supported it all.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It must feel good to at least you had the experience, and it almost reaffirmed that what you are calling yourself, hey, I'm I'm not crazy. This is who I am. So now that you're figuring that out, have you ever thought about wanting to go back again? Do you keep in touch with anyone over there right now?
I just keep touch with Sasha here and there very carefully. I know that he's monitored, so we can't mention a couple things, and he's very selective of what he says and when he can see it because they have to. But Sasha's the only like backhold spine of the original connection we had as a family and him. But I tried messaging him the other day, and he read it, but he won't respond back. So that's the only connection I have that I hold dear. With your Facebook group support, I met another Russian adoptee that was in my same orphanage, Masha.
Right. Yep. She mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that all happened when it was like after high school, and my sister said, "Hey, by the way, this girl supposedly is from your orphanage. I'm going to give you her number, and you guys can talk." And we talked, had a connection. It was legit and everything, so it's like, all right, and we have a really good connection still. And she got to meet my sister in DC when she was getting her Russian passport, so that was a really cool connection. And that triangle effect has been stronger than ever. And I was skeptical at first, and then my sister was a diehard wanting. We talked, about, do you want to find your parents? And I was like, no, not really. And she's like, well, I want to. I'm like, all right, will you do that? And then I remember getting the text message from my sister saying, I'm always going to love you. You're always going to be my main brother, but I found my real brother. I was like, oh, okay. He's in Sochi, Russia. That's nice. And then, of course, before the COVID, she was planning to go out there to meet him, and didn't happen. But she still keeps in contact with him. I don't have any family that I know about, but I don't care to, because I'm happy for my second life that I got. Beauty hides in the deep, and I'm gonna treasure getting picked from the Americans from the East Coast.
Right. Now, so East Coast in Maine. Whereabouts in Maine did you live?
Windsor, Maine, which is like 20 minutes from Augusta, which is the capital.
Oh, okay. Yep. I just say that just because, I'm right next to Maine and I vacation there a lot.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
Ogunquit, beautiful. Wells, beautiful. Portland,
Okay.
beautiful. Yeah. Anyway, so when you got that message, from your sister about that, were you, I mean, you say you were happy for her, but there was probably some bit that you felt maybe were you saddened or, I
I
mean,
really wanted to go with her if I could, just to support her, and also just, her and I talk. We're extremely close, and we joke around saying I don't think we'd be this close if we were blood related. But like we were planning it out when she was going to go, and I was like, all right, I'll try to get those days off and go with you, just because one, I would love to go back, but also I'm not alone. I would not want to do a solo trip alone.
right. Are you up to date with current passport
I am
requirements?
not, because
She is. Okay, so you'd have to get the
I'm
passport.
not interested in knowing anything. I want to, if anything, I just want a picture. I don't want to meet or see in visual. I just want to, or in like in you and I talking, I want to just have a picture.
Right. Right. Well, that's understandable. I mean, like I said, everyone's different and some want to, some don't, and you gotta respect their decisions. But um so now that the trip obviously was postponed and with the current situation, do you think your sister's going anytime soon or waiting a little bit?
This is gonna wait.
Yeah, okay. But when she goes, are you still going to want to go with her?
I would like to go with her for
Yeah,
sure.
that's great. Um, how do your so I guess maybe this question's from maybe your sister will answer this one day. Um, what did your adoptive parents have to say when she found these connections in Russia? Were they surprised, shocked, happy for her? Didn't really, how did that kind of happen?
So they were happy for sure, but the thing they wanted to know was, let's do a DNA test. What you got to make sure, we're gonna love you no matter what, but we want a DNA test just to make sure. And they did a DNA test, and it did show affirmative. So they were relieved because they were skeptical, saying, "Well, just make sure it's great. We'll love you," and they're not going to change or say, "Oh, okay, well, are you saying you want to go back to Russia?" No, that's not what they did. They just said, "Just make sure, just to back that information up."
Right.
And they never did come to me and say, "Hey, do you want to find your birth parents?" And
Are you okay with that, or?
I just grew to accept it, and it's just not like a strong value that I wanted to know, or I can't live my life. I'm happy with my second life being adopted. I'm better than I was before I was adopted. So
Well, it sounds like you're really embracing the second chance. Um,
yeah, for sure.
Definitely. Um, that's that's amazing. That's really cool that you had your sister there though as a support kind of the whole time. It must have bonded you guys forever in the good and the bad ways, I'm sure, but
Yep.
mostly good. So when you're about adoption in general, when did you know before you were told that you were adopted? Did you have a sense, or did it really finally make sense once your parents told you that night?
Yeah, I had a sense from my friends in Oregon because they all said, "Well, you're nothing like your dad. You're nothing like your mom." I was like, "Well, that's 'cause I'm adopted." And then like, yeah. And then there's a couple cases where I have my dad's jawline or something, but um, my dad's 6'4", my mom is 5 feet, I'm 5'7", so I have the in between chemical gene for that. So I can see that, but I've only been spoken Russian to like maybe 3 times in my event, just outside the realm where I was shopping and someone spoke Russian to me, and I kind of like let them talk their spiel, and I'll say nothing and say, "Well, what makes you think I was Russian?" And they just said I had a Russian nose. I'm like, "Oh, okay."
All right, sounds good. Have a good one. um,
So apparently, but that made me remind myself, saying, "Hey, I have a Russian characteristic," because I didn't know this girl and she started speaking Russian to me, and I'm like, what?"
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess, you kind of just have to go with it at that point.
Mhm.
Um, so did you ever meet any other people adopted, maybe not just from Russia, but adopted from other countries or the foster care or anyone adopted in your area at all? Or,
Um, I met at work. I met a lady that was adopted, and I said I was adopted, but she was adopted from the States, and she said that she's gonna find her real. She found her real dad, and she lived like an hour away, and really small world. But I used to bowl with this older couple, and remember hearing the story of this guy saying, "Yeah, I let this daughter go," and then she went to go meet her dad, and she texted me saying, "By the way, you've been really good friends with my dad." I'm like, "What? No way. Your real dad?" And it was the guy that I was bowling with.
oh,
And I'm like,
jeez,
"Wow."
wow.
And then he was uh because he was saying that he gave up for adoption, and I said, "I'm adopted." And yeah, it was just a small world. So I'm like, "Wow, I knew your dad before you knew him himself. That's crazy." And so that was my first time experience a adoptee per se, but United States version versus Russia. And yeah, it was really small world, mind blown, like no way. So
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, "Well, how do you feel?" She's like, "Oh, I loved him. I didn't have any regrets with him, giving me up for adoption." I'm like, "That's good." And she just grew to accept it and forgive him, which is beautiful because I remember talking to him before I met her, was he had that regret, saying, "I wish I didn't, but I had to do what I had to do." And he's now very happy with finding, she found him per se, but he's very happy that they're connected again.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I mean, as long as it's positive and it
Yeah.
helps them, that's what's important.
Yeah.
So you're still, I assume maybe, okay, maybe not the best to always assume, but you have a good relationship, it sounds like, with your adoptive parents.
I do. Yeah.
Good. So, how often would you guys talk about adoption growing up or now that you're older? Is it still talked about sometimes? Like, say they see Russia in the news, your dad picks up the phone and calls you and wants to talk about it?
No, he doesn't do that, but I just, you know, once in a while, like this last Thursday of last week, I called him and I'd been listening to your podcast and stuff, and I just always say thanks for, putting that effort and time adopting me and that trial and error, and I'm really thankful. And they're like, yeah, we loved you and you had that charm and you turned out to be a great kid. We're proud of you. And it was just a good reassurance feeling and like a normal mother and dad and relationship. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
great.
I'm
It's all,
very close. Yeah. I'm very close with my whole family, which was weird too because we were having supper and then we had this knock on the door and it was this lady and she's like, hey, sorry to bother you, but we found you saying that you had a successful Russian adoption experience. And she wanted to interview us with a tape recorder to put us into an adoption book of successful Russians adoptions. And so my sister and I signed a waiver and we said our spiel. And now that I think about it, I don't even know what the name of the book was, who the company was. It was just so, okay, we'll do it. And we told our spiel for what it was like being in the orphanage and everything. And it was
yeah,
just crazy to think that someone found us and heard about it.
yeah, that's wild. I mean, wow. I'm trying to think how they came across that. Maybe
Well, my
they,
parents were in disbelief and shock too, because
yeah.
they're pretty selective and private. So, but that was the one time that my parents sat us to the side saying, "You do not have to do this. You do not have to tell your story. You don't have to do this." And I remember that.
Wow. Well, I mean, hey, maybe one day you figure out what book you're actually in.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So, when has your thoughts about adoption in general changed throughout the years, or would you say I can tell you're very grateful of it. You're proud of being adopted from a country with a lot of core values and a very strong, rich culture and history. Um, Say you were giving, a speech about adoption, would you be very, pro adoption? You support it. You're very proud of it. Um, I guess what would your message be about adoption to the public from your own words?
So I would just listen to your heart. Just it's a big step in life, listen to your heart, which is DMT, which sings it. And it's it's a big process, but it's different in international too, but international is a little bit bigger. But just listen to what you feel is right, do what you feel is right. If you're going to search for your parents like my sister did, do it on the right terms in your right mindset, expecting what to expect. And then, don't sell yourself short on a dime. And I wouldn't, I'd be carefully optimistic, like you're not going to find anything. But if you don't, then it is what it is.
Right. Yeah, no, sometimes you have to tell people going into searches is, look, it's sometimes a very slim chance you're going to get anything. And some people can't live with that for the rest of their lives, knowing that there are some people that like, will bury themselves, unfortunately, into this hole for their whole life. And to get out of it, it's just hard to watch some people do that. But I think that, a support structure in place that people understand adoption are around you, that definitely benefits. You're lucky you have your sister, lucky
Mhm.
that your parents are very supportive people and you can talk to them about anything. That's always a awesome thing to do, I mean, it's really a blessing in a lot of ways. And the reason why we're doing, a podcast about it is we're trying to make the public more aware that adopted people aren't as different as they think we are. I mean, I couldn't
Mhm.
tell you how many like requests over the last 10 years I'd get from some student writing a college paper and about being adopted affects this in your body or this mental health reason. And it's just like, okay, like
I don't have that excuse being adopted as to why I'm single for life or I can't have a relationship.
At least you find humor out of that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good one. I like that. So your message is positive, and that's really good to hear. If say I do have one last question for you. For anyone that did try to look into their family and they were unsuccessful in finding their roots, or say they don't want to find anything about their past. They don't care about Russia. They want nothing to do with it. They want to walk away. Would that annoy you at all, or are you going to go back to your original philosophy? It's their choice, and you do what's right.
Yeah, it's their choice, but like if you can't find your real family, you have a secondary family that actually took the time and energy to get you, accept that and acknowledge that. Like say thank you to them and don't be like have regret saying I wish you didn't adopt me or just be thankful. And then if you can have a close family friend that you trust with your life, grow that to your family and root out from there. But I definitely would not hold any grudges, even if you don't feel Russian anymore or American and you do what you want to do. Just do what feel is right for you. Just be careful how you execute it because you can't hurt people. But I would take pride in anyone that actually uprooted you and took care of you.
That's beautiful. Well said. We'll take this last opportunity. I'll leave it with you for a minute or two. If there's any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to portray on to the people that are going to listen to this podcast. What's the takeaway? What do you want them to think about at the end of this?
Just don't sell yourself short. Beauty hides in the deep. I was in the deep in Russia, and somebody found a treasure out of me, and I held dear to that, and I'm never going to let that go. That value only goes up with family, and like they say, family is everything. And once that's gone, then you just have your pearl to shine, and you want to replicate that, have everyone see it.
That's awesome. Have you ever thought about writing a book?
No.
Well, I think you should.
This is my second language. I still struggle with the day-to-day text messages.
That's okay. That's all right. I do too. Well, anyway, it's been a pleasure with you tonight, Alex. Thanks so much for coming on, sharing your story, being so open about it. You're going to help a lot of people. And you're always welcome back anytime. Any major updates in your life you want to talk about, you know where to find us. And it's been a real pleasure having you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you again so much, everyone. That was Alex Smith out in Oregon. We will be posting a follow-up about his story along with this episode on voiceofadoptees.com. We're on all the major podcasts. Stay tuned. We'll be releasing it next Wednesday and every Wednesday after that for a new episode. Thanks for stopping by and tuning in. Have a great evening. And remember, Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.